enough. No, more.
Today's topic is third-party risk management. Mike, this is, by the way, a very hot topic for 2021, third parties.
Yep.
So managing the risk has also been an issue. What have you heard enough about third-party risk management, and what would you like to hear a lot more?
It's, like you said, David, pretty pervasive topic, especially in 2021. And what I've heard enough of is kind of the common practice, which is just send out a questionnaire. It's like 300 questions long. It's asking everything under the moon that you could think about. And then those answers tell you everything you need to know about that vendor. That's the perfect solution. I've heard enough of that. What I really want to hear more of is a data-driven approach that is scalable, it is repeatable, and one of the things that questionnaires definitely do not capture is continuous. I want to see this updated. I want to know when something's changing rather than on my annual reattestation. So that's what I'd like to hear more of.
All right. I am throwing this one to you, Derek, and I know the BitSight is in this area of third-party risk management, so please tell us how BitSight handles this differently.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, we're in the data business around third-party risk management, and we have been for the last 10 years. And, we think that data analysis around third-party risk is really the foundation for how to think about this problem and manage your third parties and kind of move forward the ball in terms of starting to address and resolve this issue. And that's done by collecting massive amounts of data around observable information about third parties and then sort of connecting them into an ecosystem of risk. And I think there is a place for questionnaires. I think they are useful for things like setting scope and figuring out things like vendor relationships and their risk, the risk that they pose to you.
Do they need to be hundreds of questions long? I think that's more the concern.
I think it depends on the particular use case and the risk profile. Hundreds, to me, is a bit overkill. But look, there are some useful questions. And sometimes those questions are not about trying to figure out, does this vendor have this issue? Sometimes it's about bouncing the answers to those questions off of the actual hard data sets like we have at BitSight and using it to determine if management, the people answering the questions, know what they're talking about. Because sometimes you can use those questions to, the data may say one thing, management may say something else. And that observation alone is relevant to the risk the third party is posing to you. And that's a governance question. And we can validate it by bouncing these things off of each other. And so I do think there's a use, but you have to use the data itself.
That's extremely telling when you do that. And I've seen this happen many times where there may be more of a PR spin, like I'm going to give you verbally the answer you want, even though what we're doing does not speak to that. And that's just essentially what you're trying to reveal.
Yeah, put simply, very basic question. Do you use multi-factor authentication for remote access? Yes. Okay, well, what about this endpoint that we found that doesn't use it? Right? So these are things that I think can really surface whether or not there's a holistic cybersecurity program in place versus just people sort of doing a check the box exercise with questionnaires. But again, I want to emphasize, I do think there's value to questionnaires. They have to be calibrated the right way, and you have to understand what signal you're trying to get out of them, and you have to join that with other data sets.
Let me ask this, because we had another guest on who talked about this, and his whole goal was to, like, how many questions do I need to ask? Do I realize I do not want to work with this person? Kind of thing. Like, I don't need hundreds. Probably can do it under 10 or 3 even. So I like the fact that you said that, like, what am I getting out of this? I'm not just asking questions to just get them to answer questions. What am I getting out of this? And then more to what Mike's question was how do we make this continuous?
Really hard to make questions continuous. I think you can make them event-driven, right? So if you think about the issue we're seeing in December with Log4j, that's a good opportunity to ping a lot of your key suppliers and say, do you know about Log4j? Are you doing anything about it? What are you doing about it? When do you expect to have all of your systems identified and remediated? Then let's go ahead and bounce that off of other data sets to see kind of how they're performing against the issue over time. So I think it's hard to get continuous with questions, but you could get to something that's better than, look, I'm about to sign a contract, I'm asking 300 questions, and then they go in a file never to see the light of day again. I think there's an in-between state which says periodically we re-ask a few things. And when there's a major event, we go out very tactically and say, what are you doing about this event? And maybe there's some key things about that event that you can join to the other data sets.
I have a question. So the event-driven perspective that you mentioned triggered a thought. Company I work for, we have a lot of customers, and they're sending us questionnaires right now about how are you dealing with Log4j. I'm curious how we as vendors to customers can turn this around and can basically, rather than having to field hundreds of inbound questions, what signals can we provide back to our customers? How can we communicate to them that, no, we got this, we're in a good state, in a way that they're going to be able to accept?
Yeah, great question, Mike. I had to deal with this a few times back when I was the CISO at Moody's. And I think there's a pretty simple answer. Back when we had, I think, Shell Shock and a couple of the other vulnerabilities back, I think that was around 2017, 2018. What we did is as soon as we became aware of this issue, we prepared a statement about it and we put a banner on the website that said, look, if you have questions about this particular issue, click here. And then they would, the customers would get a web page that said, we're aware of this issue. Here's what we're doing about it. And we will provide some updates here as things progress. We're in this just like everyone else, but we are committed to resolving it. And I think there are going to be some customers who still want a questionnaire filled out, but I think that goes a long way to driving some credibility in your response.